All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Succeed. I'm back again with Chykka, this time talking to me about Treasure Knight, a character that um, everyone has a lot of experience playing and shows up all the time in tournament, is a bona fide meta threat all the time. That's obviously a joke for people who are new to the Exceed community. That is not strictly true of Treasure Knight, except seemingly when Chykka is running him. So I'm very excited to have Chykka on the call with me. Chykka, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Um, Chykka is, and please correct my math on this because I've heard stories about the opinion of people pre and post Chykka regarding Treasure Knight, where prior to you picking up the character, this character's garbage. This character's bottom one in the game, you know? And then all of a sudden, you have a pretty deep tournament run with this guy on your team. And all of a sudden, people are changing their tune a little bit about it. And, I know that you're a pretty humble guy and you're about to downplay this accomplishment. But did you or did you not single handedly redefine this character in the meta?
Uh, I think meta is a bit of. I mean, I think the idea of a meta is a bit overplayed in competitive Exceed, I guess.
Mm.
But I guess people's perceptions of Treasure Knight, I guess, were lifted a bit. I guess after the run
So
I had.
it's like, did you or did you not change the perspective of people's change the meta's perspective, which is to say the Discord servers that both of us are in, uh, after running Treasure Knight? Absolutely. Whether or not that constitutes a meta, we'll find out, I guess. But certainly people talked about this character differently. Um, yeah, so again, very excited to have uh, a character who is very underrepresented to talk about today, and the person who did sort of the most work to make this character kind of rise in people's esteem in Chykka. So that's going to be exciting. Um, Disclaimer, as always, before we get started, uh, we're going to be talking about Exceed and this character in kind of playing to win terms. Uh, that is not the only way that you can play Exceed. Exceed can be fun. Exceed should be fun. Play it for fun because it's fun. Um, if these lines of play are not fun for you, or if they're not interesting, please play the ones that you do find interesting because you'll have more fun doing it. Um, Second, uh, we tend to talk about strategy on this show in fairly absolute terms, where people say things like "always do this" or "this is a terrible idea" or "never do that." Um, we are not the authority. Certainly, I'm not the authority. Chykka is slightly more of an authority than me, but even he has, he's an informed opinion on Exceed and on this character. Uh, Treat everything we say with a grain of salt. If you have a better line, if you think that we're undervaluing something, please let us know and show us why we're wrong. I'd love to hear about it. But yeah, with all that said, Chykka, tell me about Treasure Knight, because despite all the things I said at the start of this call about his meta representation, I know almost nothing about him.
So he's a character with a lot of wonkiness to him, but then if you sort of put the pieces together, he can trade reliably well. Like his damage numbers are solid, and he has a lot of armor boosts.
Sure.
And one of the things that's kind of feels wonky about him is that all of his all of his boosts, they all cost one force, and they feel slightly expensive, and can feel a little bit bad to play him when you have to pay that one force.
Right.
And so generally, one thing that one something you should consider when playing as him is you want to try to I mean, yeah, you want to try to exceed, so that you can then start playing the boost on your specials without paying the one force, and
Right.
then all of a sudden they go from feeling slightly overcosted to feeling pretty good for the cost you have to pay for them, which is zero.
Right. So relative to and we'll get into actually what the Exceed uh what it says in a second here, so as we talk about it, but in terms of how we're we're valuing, the early game for Treasure Knight. Prior to this, you were on the show talking about Chun-Li, and with Chun-Li, it was a situation where like it's not really a matter of if you exceed, it's probably a matter of when, and when ideally is early. Is that also true for Treasure Knight? Do I want to be kind of gunning for my exceed side uh, to make my long-term game plan easier?
I think it's definitely something like you want to keep your eye on. And I know for me personally, I do also value the kicker effects on the exceed quite a bit.
Okay,
Depending on the matchup as well, and the game state and the sort of game, like the tempo of the game.
right,
Um, and so in some cases, you might be able to get away with. I mean, like depending on the tempo of the game, you might be able to get away with waiting a little bit before you exceed once you get the gauge. Like if you feel like there are cards you have which you can which you're willing to discard to pay the additional force cost for the boosts, or
right,
if you don't need to like move around as much, then maybe you can afford to wait a little bit to like maximize the use of your of the kicker effects. But otherwise, um, generally speaking, exceeding as early as possible is a very good baseline to like operate off of.
okay. So his character ability reads: when spending force during a strike, you may generate one force for free, including the cost. This includes the cost of your force specials. So, uh, prior to like, and then his exceed side. When you exceed, pull up to 3. We can talk about use cases for that in a second. When spending force, you may generate one force for free. That's not limited to strikes anymore, is the big difference there. So when you're talking about high tide, anchor zip, salvage operation, all of these boosts that cost one force, that's not true when he's exceeded anymore, and that's kind of the big benefit. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so he suddenly gets a big economic boost from exceeding. So is it true then that like you mentioned that these boosts that he has are at one force cost a piece? They're kind of expensive for what they give you. Once he's flipped, are they suddenly kind of too cheap for what they give you? Like is he getting more for his value out of that, or are now have you exceeded and now you've gotten up to like decent? Does that question make sense?
I would say like the boosts. Well, like if the boosts were free, they are a bit stronger than like other characters' boosts that might look similar.
Okay.
Like for example, we have Sunken Treasure, right? It's +2 power, and at the start of the opponent's turn, place the top card of your deck face down under this boost. When the boost leaves play, add all the cards under it to your hand.
Right.
So if it was free, it's essentially fierce, but it's better, right? Because it gives you at least one card draw.
Right. And
Um,
like not having gone through what this boost actually says or what to do on it, what I'm seeing is fierce and then a lot of extra text that seems like it's a
yeah,
benefit to you. If this is a zero cost boost, this is just at worst, it's just fierce.
yeah.
Okay. So
And
odds are
Fierce is also pretty good. So I
sure.
mean, yeah. So
Okay, that makes sense. Um, so all right. Prior to exceeding then, tell me a little bit about this character ability. When spending force during a strike, I may generate one force for free. What does that do, and what am I using it for? Or is it just kind of like again, kind of like with Chun Li when we were talking about her before? Is it really just kind of a holdover until my real game plan comes online when I get my exceed ability?
it's more or less holdover. I mean, I kind of like, in my opinion, it's kind of a blank ability because, I mean, the way he's designed, his a bunch of his effects give you allow you to spend like up to like 2 force to do something. For example, like Scuttle Slam, spend up to force for each force spend, push one.
Okay,
Or Treasure Coin, you may spend up to 3
up
force
to
for each
3,
force
right?
spent. Yeah. And so it's well, this is more of a design. Like what I'm about to say is like kind of more of a belief about his design rather than evaluating his game plan. But it's just that it's kind of like it feels like is they gave him this ability that allows him to get a discount, but then they kind of added on additional cost to like make the
Right,
discount count for something.
right, because he can't not get the discount, right? Or I guess he
Yeah,
could choose not. He could choose
yeah,
not to use it, but like it's not like a
yeah,
situation where it only works on his turn or it only works with his specials. Like it's always on. He just
yeah.
always gets the discount. So in order to mitigate that discount, they just bumped everything up cost wise.
Well, it feels more like they decide to give cost to cards so that his discount actually matters. Like actually like so that his discount actually applies to like
I
I
see.
mean like the least the way I the way at least the way I see the way I see his design is that if you simply gave him a blank ability but you just took away one like you just made it like you just made the effects cost less force that
Right.
would have the same like it would be the same results
It'd be
almost. Well, I mean
pretty much
yeah,
the same.
yeah,
Because like among the normals, I guess it's block, right?
yeah,
That you're
yeah.
actually getting a benefit out of on front side, and we'll probably talk about that. I know I have heard the meme that, I don't even know if it's a meme, to be honest with you. There's a reason that I'm having this conversation with you. I've heard the meme that Treasure Knight's best card is block, and I assume that that has to do with the fact that he can spend one less force to get a more efficient block and block more damage that way.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one of the big differences is that his block stands out as being the most efficient block, maybe in the
Right,
game, or at least one of them. And the other one is with Anchor Launch. Basically, he Anchor Launch is a force special without the downsides of force special, which is that you can uh, basically it's uh, when I say it has the benefits of a force special without the downsides of a force special, what I mean is that if you get it off a wild swing,
oh, you can
um,
choose to invalidate it, sure.
yeah, yeah, you can choose to invalidate it,
I
and if you want to
see.
play it, you can just you can just play without paying the force. So it's
I gotcha.
basically it has like it's as strong as like, and also if you look at the stats of the card, it's people like to say that like Anchor Launch is the best card, and if you just look at the numbers, then that is probably true.
Right,
Um, yeah, and the stats make it the stats of the card make its status as a force special like warranted.
right, but then
Um,
he doesn't need to pay the cost of the force
yeah,
special
yeah, yeah. So it's
unless he chooses to invalidate it.
yeah, or well, even if he invalidates it, he doesn't have to. Well, if he invalidates it, he wouldn't be playing the attack at all. So
Right, right, right.
yeah,
He can choose to leverage the fact that it is a force special by invalidating it if he needs to on a wild swing.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And other than block, there isn't anything on front side that actually benefits from this, but so the just for completion's sake, uh block's effect, spend any amount of force for +2 armor per force spent. The first one is free for him, basically. So he just has more efficient blocks. He's
Yeah,
harder to kill because of it. Um, okay, and
yeah,
because
yeah,
of the limitation to uh, the force expenditure being during a strike on front side, you know, basically in order to evaluate the rest of his deck as we go through all of his cards in turn, I'm just going to mentally add in that all of his force costs when the cards come up are just one less, and
yeah,
that's probably going to be how we should think about it, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then what happens to my game plan when I flip? What's the benefit, or what are some of the use cases of spending force, generate one force for free?
So that's that lets him play his boosts like more frequently in a more and make playing his boost feel more sustainable. And it lets him move around the arena more efficiently, right?
Right.
So I wouldn't say his game plan changes. It just becomes uh, it becomes essentially easier to play his game plan. Like
Okay.
his game plan is still largely the same, which is um, so he has a lot of armor boosts and some power boosts, which makes him really good at like if he gets trades against his opponent, he's likely to trade up
Okay.
because of those that part like that's the strength of his kit because he has armor and power in his kit.
Right.
And he has some see. He also has like a card that hit a lot of different ranges, so he's good at. And then especially once he exceeds and has more efficient movement, he can be pretty good at playing at his opponent's bad ranges.
Okay.
And he has a bunch of interesting tools at range two. I would say, like I mean, a lot of his attacks hit at range two.
Okay.
So if you needed to pick like a good range for him to be at, just kind of agnostically, it would be like one or two. One just because one is like generally the range where
Trades happen.
you can just play cards that trade. Yeah,
Yeah.
trades happen. And then range two, just because a lot of the attacks, like they have a minimum range of like two. Like for example, like Angle Call and Treasure Coin have a minimum range of two, and Scuttle Slam is on curve at range two.
Right. Okay. And just before we get ahead of ourselves into the cards here, just to talk a bit more about the Exceed side. Um, so he has more efficient movement because the move action requires you to spend force, and you're just getting one for free.
Yeah.
So that that means that I can effectively reuse step, right?
Yes. Yeah.
When I'm in Exceed side, I can spend 0 to move 1, but I could also spend 1 to move 2 or 2 to move 3. So it's actually more.
It's
Uh,
better than
it's just a better reuse step.
yeah.
Likewise, changing cards requires force. So I could spend 1 to CC 2 and draw 3, including friend of turn, uh,
Yeah.
or
Your change cards become better. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So he just kind of does everything that involves force more efficiently once he's
Yeah.
exceeded, and
Exactly.
and conveniently on top of that is his force cost on his boost. I noticed that Secure Vault, again, we're not going over it yet, but Secure Vault has a hit effect that says spend up to 2 force. That's also discounted. Um, in terms of timing,
Well, just to clarify,
yeah,
the hit effect of Secure Vault, it gets discounted on either side because it's during a strike.
it's during a strike, of course.
Yeah.
I was actually so I was asking about two things actually. One is when he's exceeded, he still gets his front side ability. Just when spending force, you may generate 1 force for free. Does not mean when spending force, except during a strike, you may generate 1 force for free. He still gets to do all of his in strike stuff. Just he has other
Yeah.
discounts on top of it. Correct?
Yeah. It's just his ability applies more broadly,
More
basically.
broadly, right?
Yeah.
So during a strike itself, then, just so I'm clear on it and kind of can value correctly, if I spend when spending force during a strike, you may generate 1 force for free. I play my force special. And I have Secure Vault in play. When I played the force special, that was my free force, right? I can't then say, okay, now it's a new timing. It's still during the strike. So I'm not then getting 1 force free off of um the hit effect on Secure Vault. Is that correct?
It's actually for every instance you would spend force. So
Real
I would
okay,
just yeah, yeah.
it's stronger than I think it is then.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay, cool. So if on my turn, if I'm not sure if he has any like action compression boost where he can move and strike at the same time or take another action or something. If I could take the move action, reduce the force cost, and then strike and reduce the force cost, that's still fine. It's every single time I'm using force.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's really good to know. And so as we go through the kit, um, that he doesn't have to pick and choose. It's whenever the situation comes up, he just gets the ability to discount it by 1.
Yeah.
Neat. All right. Um, so efficient movement, efficient change cards, boosts that are a little bit stronger than they should be, good armor, good trading potential, the ability to be at ranges can't that his opponent can't really contest well. It kind of he kind of sounds like a Shoto. He kind of sounds like a tanky Shoto. Is that like maybe not in terms of kit shape, but in terms of game plan as like a kind of counterplay character? Is that accurate, or does he have a different kind of win condition or something?
I would say there. Uh, I mean, I would say like his default win condition is just to like he just wants to play boosts which give him armor and power and hit the opponent, and then um, but then also like have the ability, and then also have the ability, like especially once he exceeds, he has the ability to play it, essentially move to his opponent's bad ranges, and
Mhm.
then sort of play an attrition game where they have to spend more to like ideally, well, I mean, unless they have a lot of, maybe if they have a lot of action compression, it's different,
Right.
or but because he has a lot of because he has attacks that can hit a lot of different, he has, I mean, because his kit isn't but the range, like, he has some attacks that hit close and some attacks that hit far. So depending on what options you have left, you can if those happen to be at ranges where your opponent's bad at, you can just move to those ranges to essentially threaten them, and then
Right.
um,
And just continue. I mean, if you're Ryu stepping but better, just maintaining that range and uh capitalizing on your opponent's option bleed or whatever you're doing to choke them out is kind of his default plan.
yeah, or at least it's like a tactic you can employ.
Okay.
I guess I would probably have. I mean, I think maybe I mean, I don't. I mean, I'm not like familiar enough with like. I haven't played enough fighting games, or and I haven't been like immersed enough into like seat design to like say whether or not uh, these qualities about him really fit the Shoto molds. But
Right.
I think Shotos typically tend to have a lot of attacks that are pretty potent on their own, and
Mm.
I would say that that's maybe one element that makes that one element that one trait of Treasure Knight which doesn't fit that paradigm, because
Okay.
a lot of a lot of his attacks are like pretty wonky, and some of them don't feel. They look like, if you just kind of look at them on in a vacuum, they look pretty
Right.
bad, right? And
They're
that's
pretty
part of the
bad.
reason he has, yeah, and that's part of the reason that he has like a reputation of being a bad character.
Okay.
Um, and I guess he also doesn't have some other like classic Shoto staples like like a DP or like overhead or like a
Okay.
tot. I mean, this is, I don't know if this counts as a
So
Tatsu or not, but
so in every particular, I'm wrong, basically, except maybe the part where he stands at a range where his opponent can't deal with it, and he's good at getting to that range. Um, so it sounds like I've got the read wrong there, and that's why I'm the student and not the expert in this transaction.
I mean, he technically
Um,
has a fireball, but it's like I mean, this is like a bad fireball, and this is a. I mean, I guess it's a good slow fireball.
sure,
I don't know if that's enough to make
yeah.
him a
You
Shoto, I
don't
guess.
you don't need to work so hard to find ways that I'm right. I'm fine with just taking that L. It's all good, man. So, it sounds like that's a pretty good, unless you've got like more like very general, opening remarks about how to play this character. It sounds like it's a good time to get into his kit itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, start with wherever you think it makes sense to start.
Hmm. Okay. That's actually because he doesn't have like. I mean, I would say like his most reliable attack is dive charge, but like if you can give it a boost, if you can play the EX, then essentially if you play it in ranges 1 or 3, it generally doesn't really lose too much, and it also in a lot of ranges can push sweep away.
Okay.
So it's a very solid card that if you have the right, like if you have a boost out, like a defensive boost out, like defend or +2 armor or even +1 armor, or like any of these three boosts, or
Anything to give it a little bit more defense. It sounds like.
yeah, then it's pretty reliable at just hitting the opponents.
Okay.
If they don't have any like extra power in play, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then when you hit, and then you just want to hit the opponent with this, and essentially it lets you trade, and um, if it hits focus, then it gets the full like the full +3 power, which
Right.
means it
It
trades
hits for 6.
evenly. Yeah.
Right.
And otherwise, there are situations where you can also like push sweep 3 spaces and then cause sweep to miss,
Right.
or if they're cornered, then like, you can just you can do the hit effect will do the max +3 power, and you still trade pretty well in the sweep, and sometimes you can break it if you just have a bit more power, right? If you
Some
have
kind of
fierce
power boost
out,
on it.
yeah,
Right. And I see what you mean if this is where we're starting. I see what you mean about a uh on its own this card being slightly underwhelming, or at least underwhelming looking, because looking at the stats, this is uh slower assault with not enough guard to deal with most range 3 options. Right. But then it has the upside, like it's got some sort of like positional mid speed elements of being able to push sweep out of the way. But then when you EX it, or you put to get a little bit more defense on it, or you put an armor boost on it, something to make its defenses stronger, it's just kind of something that you can slam down anywhere between ranges 1 and 3, and you're probably
Yeah.
getting some benefit out of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And as you said, it kind of plays to his game plan of just trading well. Um, so am I? And I guess we'll talk about this as we learn more about the other elements of his kit. Um, is this just a reliable button I can press that tends to do okay? Like it doesn't seem like when it wins, it doesn't seem like it wins overwhelmingly. Even in its best case scenario, I'm not like stunning focus or anything like that. I'm just trading,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping to trade a little bit up. Is that kind of what I'm going to see a lot when we go through Treasure Knight's kit? Is just like they're not uh incredible, uh like mind blowing cards, but they get the job done.
Most of the time, I would say that. But there are like situations like you can. There are there are what's the right word? Like in a low key kind of way, they can. You can maybe like craft a game state um, where you can get like the highest value out of it, such as
Okay.
like if you put +2 power on this, all of a sudden it does beat focus, right?
Right. Okay.
Or yeah. And then if you have like this boost and plus and you have the EX, it just needs you just need 2 power from somewhere and then it
Right.
breaks
And then
focus,
so
right?
and then suddenly it beats focus, or you need a little bit of armor or guard, and suddenly now it can trade up on faster options pretty consistently.
Yeah.
So is the other thing that I'm noticing is that you mentioned that he prefers to be at range 1 or 2, and this is depositioning him from that range. Is it just that he's down with people being in the corner, and he's okay with them being in the corner, or is this like to set up another attack? Something like anchor launch or something like how do I value that +3 other than pushing sweep out of the way?
Uh, I would say you do definitely want to consider the follow up game states. You do have two ranged options. If you do happen to push them, I guess to the max full distance. Generally speaking, generally speaking, when it comes to the push three, what I would value the most out of that is just being able to beat sweep.
Right.
Um, but yeah, but if you well, what I'm thinking with treasure coin, is that hmm, should I get into that now or should I get into that later? I guess when I talk, well, just to talk kind of more.
I mean, we
Uh,
can we can we can segue into treasure coin right next when we're talking about that. The only other question that I had about this is that, like, the more I look at it, the more I see that it makes sense as a range 1 option, because
yeah,
if it beats sweep and it beats grasp and it trades well into focus, y- that's that's already a lot, right? Like it's got enough movement coverage, and has enough guard to deal with um, grasp. It pushes sweep out of the way in most game states. Like, I'm not actually sure it needs much more of a sales pitch than that. Now that I think about it a little bit more, that's actually pretty good, right? That does
yeah,
have
yeah,
some utility. Okay.
yeah. That's what
Um.
that's why I would kind of think of this card as sort of like the anch like it's like the most. Well, I mean, it's kind of weird to say the most reliable just because of the defense, like the 3 guard that makes it seem not the most reliable. But
Right.
it just there's a lot of ways that he can make it like the most reliable card in his kit,
Right.
and that's why and then also it fits into like what he wants to do with his boost. So
Right.
I think that's why it's like a centerpiece.
Okay.
I know a lot of people like to say anchor launches, but
Right. Well, certainly there's
yeah,
more numbers on that card,
yeah,
and my sort of like day one exceed player brain is saying that more numbers equals more good. But I see what you mean about this, that it kind of has some hidden benefits. So, like, without anything else on it, dive uh dive charge, you play it right here. Uh, you make them whiff a sweep or
yeah,
a grasp, or you play it on defense against a grasp in a situation where they're likely to be initiating with. I mean, like, if I'm Ryu here, I'm playing sweep 100% of the time if I have it. Like this is a great position to play sweep in.
Yeah.
You just shove it on defense, it's probably going to do fine. But then if you get it out a little bit at range and you're worried about your opponent's assaults or something, now suddenly you do need like an EX or a little bit of extra armor or guard on it. Is that kind of how this goes? Like is the are the boosts just to give it a little bit more positional flexibility or a little bit more upside? Um, and you can kind of just play it on its own if you need to. How does the valuation of that work?
I mean, generally speaking, I would not suggest playing dive charge on its own. Like, I mean, yeah, because by its own, it does, it does look pretty like a very weak card.
Mm.
Even if even if it does push sweep out of the way, and even if it does trade with grasp, and even if it does trade with focus, um, it's just there are so many ways to make it, like
Make it way better than that.
yeah, make it and like just make it way more reliable.
Okay.
Because like even at range, like if even like because let's say I mean at range one, I guess like against, I mean I guess you could play it just a single copy of it, and as long as your opponent's not playing assault like range one assaults,
Right.
then this will probably
You're at least trading.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it does flat out beat the sweep. It just feels I just feel like whenever I have a boost on top of it and then play it, I just don't have to worry about.
Sure.
There's like way less things for me to worry that I have to worry about, and I get more value out of it
Sure. So
generally.
as we go through the boost later, we'll probably keep coming back to or to dive charge and see where some of those benefits are. But it sounded like you had a segue into treasure coin that I want to hear about.
Okay, yeah. So you were asking, well, what do you do after if you do play dive charge and it pushes the opponent a full 3 distance?
Right.
So you have two ranged options. You have anchor launch and treasure coin. Um, and so treasure coin is one of the two attacks that does hit at range 4, and so you could play it. But if you play a single copy of it, it's like under curve. It's only speed 3. And if your opponent thinks you're playing either of these super projectiles, they can just play dive, and then it'll beat both of them, right?
Sure. So
Yeah,
and just before we keep going, treasure coin, we've got two range that could be up to 5.
yeah.
And up to 6 power, and its hit effect, add a treasure coin from your discard pile to your gauge that I might want to hear about once we get to that. But yeah, just yeah, please continue. I just wanted to make sure that we got it's a slightly underwhelming looking under speed fireball, but could do a lot of damage if you spend a lot of force on it. It looks like.
Yeah, and one of those forces is free, so
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So it's a little
So
bit. It's actually a little bit less, and then you also get if you have a second copy of treasure coin in your discard pile, you get the gauge back. So the economic value on it is actually a bit better than it looks.
okay.
Yeah. In terms of ranges that treasure coin is good at, I would say usually I would say probably range 5 is the best, and then range 2, and then maybe range 4, which does sound counter like sorry word counterintuitive to
Right.
the fact that I'm talking about it when the
When
fact that we're segueing
you're
into it.
talking about specifically about when you push to range 4 for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Um, okay, so the best time to use treasure coin is actually, I mean, kind of similar to dive charge is when you have the EX, because then that makes it that makes it 4 speed, and it gives it 5 defenses, right?
Right. And
Um,
it deals with dive then. At least
yeah,
on offense it deals with dive.
yeah,
Oh, and then one of the copies of the EX goes to discard,
exactly.
and then
Yeah, that's
okay, and then they both go to gauge, so you get 2 gauge for free. Well, for
yeah,
hitting at least. Okay.
yeah. So all of what you said kind of adds up into why like EX treasure coin is such a good EX.
Okay. And the 3 guard is not remarkable on its own because most fireballs or something, well, I guess a slow fireball, or I'm sorry, a fast fireball might not break 3 guard. So that's like a tiger shot or something might still, you might still be able to trade with. But when you EX it, now you have 5, and you can actually meaningfully contest stuff.
Yeah.
Um, or one of his many armor boosts that would make this a little bit
Yeah.
more palatable. Okay.
This might be a good time to segue into this particular armor boost, High Tide.
Okay.
It's +2 armor before you may spend 2 force. If you do push 1, it's really just spend 1 force
Right.
because of the discount.
Right.
And so when you have this boost out, you can just play Treasure Coin, and even if they dive you, you'll take 3 damage, and then you're still going
Oh,
to be able to hit back by
you
spending a force.
you push 2. I'm sorry, you push 1 as a before effect. Now they're in range of treasure coin. Uh, you hit and you get it to your gauge anyway. Interesting. Okay. And you're trading well because you're trading evenly with the dive.
Yeah, yeah. So if you don't have the EX Treasure Coin, you can boost this, and then at range, like your Treasure Coin is pretty safe to um,
Right.
respond with.
Okay. And that's the use case for range 4, and you said it's better at range 5. I assume just because the dive won't even hit then.
Yeah, yeah. At range 5, you
Okay.
can just play it, and all you have to do is worry about your opponent's projectiles, usually.
Right. Right. And obviously it'll be matchup dependent whether you need the EX. For Ryu, for example, like he's got a Hadouken, he's probably gonna play the Hadouken. You're gonna have to mitigate that threat somehow. For some characters, they just don't have the ability to deal with this card
Yeah,
at range 5.
yeah.
Then what about range 2? Is
This
is
is
it is it
for
is it
it's like a
like
cross call out.
a
Yeah,
cross catch? Sure.
yeah, yeah. And then if they're not playing cross, if they play a slow option, this also happens to hit. So it's just a range where I mean, unless your opponent is playing a jump in, you're likely going to be able to hit them.
Okay.
But you usually really want to play this uh, you don't really want to play this by itself. I mean, I guess as like a lot of Treasure Knight attacks, like especially like these two, you wanna have a boost attached to it that makes it that essentially shores up like its biggest weaknesses.
Right.
And a boost like High Tide does that really well.
That makes sense. Um, should we go on to it sounds like we're doing specials first, and then we can do boosts afterward. Do you want to just head right over to Aquamine just because it's right here?
Uh, yeah, yeah, I can do that. I would say High Tide is probably boosted most of the time, but if you just need to play an attack, if your opponent is playing an attack that um will allow where if they're diving in, if they're playing some kind of jump in, you can kind of just reliably play this, and then if they are jumping in, then they'll take 7 damage, right?
Right.
Because it's
Um,
5 damage plus if they move during the strike, if they were moved, they take +2. Your attack gets Aquaman gets +2 more power.
right. And is there anything that I can do to any boost that I can use to set up the hit effect on this to make it hit 7 power? I guess High Tide, the
Yeah, I think
other
High
uh,
Tide.
the other copy
Yeah,
could do it.
I think so. Yeah, I don't really. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't really set up for the +2 power. I think it's. I kind of just. I'd rather High Tide set up other things such as because it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, the hit effect is kind of a bonus, right? Like I'd rather use High Tide to like shore up my weaknesses rather than
Sure.
use it to set up additional damage in Aquamine. Um, that's the way I would look at both the boost and the hit effects.
Yep.
I think the hit effect just lets you trade especially well if your opponent decides to. You can also play a mix-up where you're threatening Treasure Coin or Anchor Launch, but you actually just play the Aquamine to catch their dive or assault in.
Okay, that makes sense. Kind of the same way that you might call out a dive with a sweep or something like that
Yeah, yeah,
to do a bunch of damage to them. And then the after effect, spend up to 2 force and that's really 1 force. Uh,
yeah,
but so you can retreat 2 with this. So you could at range 2 this could get out of the way of a sweep again, for
yeah,
example, if you're playing
yeah,
it on offense.
yeah.
Okay.
That is something that is like a cheeky mix-up you can do. It is I mean, I guess it's kind of risky, but yeah, if you think your opponent, I mean, I guess it wins against focus as well, so maybe it's
Yep.
actually less risky than.
Right.
I mean, I suppose it is less risky than actually just than playing. If you're playing a range 2 sweep, this is probably safer than a range 2 sweep.
Right.
Assuming you have the space to back up two
Right.
spaces.
I'm seeing kind of a similarity between uh, this card and this card, uh, Dive Charge and Aquamine, where they both kind of set range 4 uh, in a lot of situations where you would play them. And so it seems like he kind of has a suite of melee cards, and then he's got a suite of ranged cards that
Yeah,
the
yeah,
melee cards set up.
yeah. He also has this ultra. Or I guess technically even this other one. Like both of them can hit a range 4.
Hit at range 4. Okay.
Yeah. Master Chest is like kind of more. There's more of an asterisk attached because the way it works, it only hits the center 3 spaces.
Right.
So if you push 4, that maybe often isn't. But depending on where you're pushing them from, I guess it
Sure.
may or may not
Right.
be.
Okay. So this is, but when you started talking about Aquamine, the first thing you said was that High Tide is probably the better use of this card. Um, just to set up other things and for that armor boost.
Yeah.
Um, and like honestly, like +2 armor is especially assuming that we're playing it when we're exceeded. That's a lot. That's a a boost that does not need. I mean, like it's it's almost like +2 power sometimes. Like
Yeah.
that's a good boost on its own. So Aquamine is maybe a lesser concern, but there are some use cases for it. It sounds like.
Yeah. I think it's just the sheer number of attacks that that it sets up. So it's just it's there's treasure coin, but there's also in terms of just like attacks that guarantee that you hit with, like high tide, you can make sure that your treasure coin hits. You can also make sure your spike hits, which is a pretty big deal. I don't know if we
Oh yeah, I can get
I
a
should
spike. Hold on a second. Here you go.
Yeah, so spike has a minimum range, and high tide if you're playing spike at range 2 or 3, you have high tide boosted, then you don't have to worry so much about like assaults, beating your spike, right, or any
Right.
option that closes in.
If
Um,
if they assault in, you're gonna even with a stronger attack than assault, you're gonna armor through it just fine, and then you're gonna push out and hit them back.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Again, like you're very right that a lot of these things are like seemingly kind of underwhelming, and then you set them up in clever ways, and they start to make a little bit more sense. All right, so
Yeah,
Aquamine uh is not is could be a useful attack, but is mostly used for high tide.
yeah, that's
Um,
the way I look at it. And also
okay,
there's a third attack which is like anger call. I suppose even it could work with the Maelstrom Trust as well. But like I would say like these are the 3 classic ones. That
okay,
like if you even at range 1, if they're out of focuses, you can just play these, right? Like and then if you're not if they're at ranges 2 or 3, then these will practically always hit. Like the only time it doesn't hit is if they dive over you. But even in the chance that they do defensively dive over you, at least you do have the 2 armor to make you take less
yep,
damage.
yep, okay, that makes sense. And I mean, if they're at range 1 or 2, the dive won't even hit anyway in most positions. So
Yeah,
you're,
yeah,
it's it would require a hard call out on their part to defuse that, and that's if they do that, then well played to them. Um, so okay, so we've got that's the first 3 specials covered. Um, let's do Scuttle Slam next. What is so you mentioned this is another range 2 option. It's on
yeah,
curve at 2. It's also another push. So he has a lot of things that take you from
yeah.
range 2 to range 4 or so.
Well, this one
Um,
doesn't take you to range 4. This one only takes you to range 3. But what this one does kind of have in common is that I guess like these 2 attacks, Aquamine and Scuttle Slam, they have a lot of optional movement. So they're pretty good at like potentially evading. Like I guess Aquamine's pretty slow, so it's only going to evade other slows.
right,
Um, but Scuttle Slam, you can push your opponent like after you hit with it. Like your opponent can end up either at range 1, 2, or 3, and you get to choose. So it's kind of like Grasp, but like at range 2. You can kind of think of it that way, I guess.
okay. Sure,
Um,
and a little bit more expensive, but not that much more expensive because you're Treasure Knight. Um,
yeah,
all right, and you can use it to get yourself out of the corner with
yeah,
with
yeah.
but it's mostly a positional special.
Yeah, you can kind of think of it as like a worse DP. Well, like I mean, yeah, it's not well, it's not really DP, but if you have the EX, it's essentially a DP.
Yep.
Um, but you can also like if you notice. So the other thing is that like a lot of Treasure Knight specials. Well, okay, so Treasure Knight likes to play a lot of armor boost, right? And
Yeah.
one way your opponent might try to deal with that is by playing Spike, and on top of that, Treasure Knight has two specials that are you know that are bad at defending against Spike with. But
Right.
yeah, and then also you might it's easy for if you have a bunch of armor boosts out. Maybe if like if you just Treasure Knight just plays it slow, then usually Treasure Knight's going to trade up really high against the opponent that's playing it fast into them, right?
Right.
Um, but and so one way the opponent might try to play against the armor boost is to play Spike.
Right.
And
This gives you a couple different ways to deal with Spike.
yes, yeah, and this is one way you can deal with Spike is by playing Scuttle Slam because it's it just closes in and then you don't have to push them, right?
Don't have to
Like a lot
push
of
at
DPs
all.
actually, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of DPs actually lose the Spike because they end up
Right.
pushing Spike two spaces and then
To
Spike,
to a to a range where Spike still hits and trades up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But with this one, you can beat the Spikes by just not pushing them, and then there's also a bunch of characters with like these range 1 and 2 attacks that, and then if you run into those, you can just push them the full distance to dodge
Right.
those. So this is like good against like attacks which have quirky shapes of their own, like awkward hitboxes.
Yep.
Because this lets you push them out of the range of the awkward hitbox,
And
basically. Or
because the range of the I'm sorry, because the push is optional and could be one, it could be two, you can kind of control how much you need after you see it. You can sort of option select your way
yeah,
to dodging what you need to dodge.
exactly, yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. And it seems again it would combo fairly well with oh no, it doesn't just because the
Yeah,
where is
it's
it?
actually a little bit awkward. Yeah,
Yeah.
because this is
You,
a
you
yeah,
can't increase the push effect because then you're advancing back in again. Um
yeah.
okay, so high tide does not really help there. Okay. That makes sense though.
So these are your two in terms of spike counters. You have Scuttle Slam. You also have Dive Charge. That
Right.
in most cases, like there's like one case where it doesn't beat Spike, and that's if you push exactly one space. Or
Right.
sorry, if you push exactly two spaces, because then it only gets +1 power. But if you push like only one space, it gets +2 power, and then that's enough to beat Spike. And then if you
Right.
push the full three spaces, then Spike is out of range.
Is out of range anyway. Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then if you just absolutely, need if you have this ultra online, if you just and you don't have any better options to play to beat Spike, like let's say your opponent boosts like a lot of speed and they play Spike, you have Anger Call, which is that immunity.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. That makes sense. And then the one that we sort of started with is saying that it was his special that people, their eyes go to first. Anchor
Yeah,
launch, the force special. So this is it's got a lot of numbers on it. So it's a 3 to 6 fireball, 2 speed with 7 effective defense and 6 power. That's already a lot. And it the opponent discards a card at random, and then it
yeah,
pulls to range 2. And then if you whiffed,
yeah.
you advance a lot. All right. Chykka, break this card down for me. There's too many numbers and letters here for me to parse.
All right, so I would say the after effect is pretty niche. It's like super situational. Like if you, but it like if you have some big brain play, like it can kind of enable that. But I
Right.
guess we can. So like what you want to focus on is like the rest of the card, the big stats and like the hit effects.
Right.
Um, so you do want to hit this card, but generally speaking, if your opponent wants to not get hit by it, and like they have a lot of options to, with they can
Right.
play to not get hit by it.
Yeah. At 2 speed and a limited range band, there's a lot of ways out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so if you, so like generally, you could just throw the mix-up out and have let's say yeah, these are the starting spaces. Um, yeah, I mean you could just, I mean if you wanted to, I guess you could just throw it out and and I guess the worst, I mean just to play the mix up to see if your opponent's going to dive in or like play slow or cross. They're probably not going to cross out just because it exists.
Right.
Which means maybe maybe playing dive on the opening on the first turn is not a bad idea. Or well, I mean, I guess well, at least your dive won't get crossed out probably.
Right.
But generally speaking, this is a card that is like much more threatening, like in the mid to late game, when your opponent's when your opponent loses some of their assaults and dives to other things or just to
Right.
discards.
They,
And
they,
then
they, they've started to bleed options a little bit. As you mentioned at the start, like this is kind of where Treasure Knight starts to shine, is he can start to stand at ranges that they can't deal with and start to punish uh, the holes in their defenses.
yeah.
Okay.
And then like and just having this, like if you like just having like if you don't play like just like saving this for the later game, you're always going to be kind of holding the threat of this over your opponent's head,
Right.
so they might be wary about kind of standing at far ranges. Um, I would say this card is probably, I mean it's generally good in like most games, but like the absolute best matchups for this card is like against zoners.
Right.
Because like it has like has 2 armor and 5 guard. So if your opponent is playing a fireball, you can always just like if you're pretty confident playing a fireball, you can just like play this in response to it.
Right.
Yeah, or if you think your opponent's playing something that will push you like 2 spaces, like at range 2,
Yep.
you can use this as a call out. That's like a more read space, like a risky option, but
Right.
it's potentially an option. Um, but like I guess back to the context of zoners. Not only does this counter hit most attacks that zoners can throw out, you're also pulling them to range 2, which is not a range they want
Right.
to be at.
Right. And
And,
it's a range that you do want to be at. I
yeah,
mean, we've got uh sets up long range, uh plays at long range, sets up mid to long range, sets up long range, sets up short range. So he's zipping around a lot actually.
yeah.
Or
I would say this
it
one is. I mean, I guess this one, these two consider long range.
yeah,
This one really sets up like mid range at most. But it's more of a. I mean, uh, depending on what's in your hand, you could set up for like what to boost next, for example.
right.
But I think like the easiest approach to like finding use out of the hit effect is just to use it to dodge like your opponent's awkward hitbox attacks.
Right.
But yeah, depending on your hand, like if you have if you have a lot of stuff, good stuff at range 1, you can just stay at range 1. But if you have like EX assaults, you can push them to range 3.
Right.
Yeah, depending
So
on
so
what's in your hand.
hey,
Yeah,
other than Treasure Coin though, all of his specials move him or the opponent. And
yeah,
they tend to do it in ways that seem like they could set one another up. You know, I could play Aquamine at range 2 or Dive Charge and set up Anchor Launch, or I could set up Anchor Launch in a way that sets up Scuttle Slam or something. Um, it, is that sort of part of his like gameplay loop, or is that just like a useful thing he can do is deposition his opponents a lot?
I think you could definitely incorporate that into his gameplay, like once he, especially once he exceeds, because
Mhm.
like range 4 is like maybe I guess it's a range you can say he gets often from like the 2 attacks we mentioned, but it's not like ideal for actually hitting attacks. Like range 4 might actually be, because at ranges 1 to 3 he can hit his normals, right?
Right,
And he can hit, if he has EX dive charge, or even yeah, if he has like EX dive charge, he can play that at range 3 really reliably. You can play dive charge in range one fairly reliably. Um, Even Aquamine, like it only loses the grasp or like cross, right? But like everything and kind of like I mean, I guess at range 4, like Aquamine is generally pretty like reliable if you think your opponent's going to jump in, or if you think they're going to play slow, you can kind of just I suppose if you don't mind losing your high tide, you can kind of trade. You kind of just null strike slow for slow.
Right.
But in terms of like actually hitting attacks at range 4, it's there's I mean like none of your normals hit here. I mean your dive hits here, I guess, but none of your other normals hit here, and your special is all kind of risky to hit. And then at ranges 5 or 6, generally you have treasure coin or you have ankle launch, right?
Right.
As the two attacks that uh, you can use to hit your opponent with, and oftentimes they have nothing to respond with because they don't have projectiles of their own.
Right. Or you've run them out of options at this point because you're saving them for late game or something.
Yeah. Um, so the thing is like once you exceed, if you do establish range 4, because of Aquamine or Dive Charge, all of a sudden you could just move to range 3 or 5 without spending any resources, right? And
Right.
then you can just threaten. You can just like, oh, I'm range 4, now I'm at range 5, and I can just threaten these attacks, and I force you to do something. And
Right.
if you don't, yeah. So that's how he gets like. I mean, that's the way he can get tempo, I suppose. Is tempo the right word here? Like he gets a lot of, because of the free movement. He can make the tempo moves he wants to play without spending resources or
That makes
spending
sense.
he can spend less resources to make the tempo plays that he wants to make.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. All right. So that's his special kit, and as you mentioned, his specials and his cards in general kind of get recontextualized by his boosts.
Yeah.
Do we want to cover ultras first, or should we move on to the special boosts?
We can talk about the special boost first.
Okay. So, but before we do, I just have a question about this because you mentioned this at the start. Is that they start out with 1 force, and they change to 0 force because of his exceed ability later in the game.
Mhm.
My question is, before we talk about these boosts and how to evaluate them, how much of the game am I spending exceeded? Like I know that I'm rushing it, but
Yeah.
how good is my gauge generation? How many other considerations do I have? Is it reasonable to assume that in the first few turns of the game I'm going to be able to get this online, or is this something that for a decent chunk of the game these are 1 force boosts and I'm going to have to evaluate them as 1 force boosts, or do I get online in many games so quickly that they become 0 force boosts most of the time?
You probably want. I mean, it's 3 gauge, so it's like landing 3 attacks. So generally speaking, you can expect for a third of the game to pass before you get enough gauge to exceed.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Unless your opponent is really. I mean, I guess your opponent could be really good at like
At denying you,
Yeah,
right?
denying gauge.
But I'm just
Um,
I know that like on treasure coin, uh, add a treasure coin from your discard pile to your gauge. There's some gauge generation there that could go towards that, but that would require you to already have treasure coin in your discard. Like I'm just wondering if he
yeah,
has any other
yeah.
sources of gauge to speed up his
So you can play expensive key charge. I mean, and like this card is not. It's not. I don't think it's designed to be played as like a key charge. It's designed to help you recur cards. And
yeah.
a lot of people like to meme like, "Oh, I can recur block."
Right, yeah, block. I spend block, and then later on I recur block to play block
Yeah,
again, so I can block forever.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. But if you feel that you need gauge, like if you don't like the other plays you have, and you want gauge, you can always just play this as an expensive key charge.
right.
It's like not ideal, but it's not a bad option if you're not in a good position, I guess.
Okay, so it sounds like I'm not going to be doing, other than just playing normal exceed. I'm not going to be doing too many like really bold early game plays to get gauge to get exceed
Yeah,
faster. So I guess follow up to that question, for the first third of the game, then without too much I can do about it, uh, these boosts all cost 1 force. Do I try to wait to spend them? Do you remember when we were talking about Chun Li, for example,
yeah,
and you mentioned wait to spend your special boosts on Chun Li until you have the exceed mode that really makes them powerful.
yeah.
Are these so much better on exceed side or is my economy so frail on front side that I should really be thinking twice about spending them at all until after I've exceeded, or can I do it if I need to?
I think you can do it if you need to. I think you do want to avoid. I think you do want to. You definitely do want to boost them after you exceed, just because they come free. But
Right.
if you need to boost them, like if you need to boost them to like hit a, if you need to boost, I don't know, like this for example, to or +3 armor in order to in order to hit dive charge,
Yeah. To get
that's
out
something
of
you can do. It's just one force. So
or to get out of
like
a bad situation or something, but really it's probably better to wait until after I've exceeded.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say that's the general guideline, but I think it like especially at a high what's the right word? Like in real like in like I think you can optimize it so that you can really consider the context of how much you need to boost to play these boosts. And if you need it, if you it's just one, it is, I mean, it is one force. So if you're not doing it too often, then if you're just doing it in the situations where it counts, then like maybe you have cards you don't need and you can afford to pay one force like every so often, right?
It makes sense.
It's just that if you do it like, if you start doing it a lot, then it definitely adds up, and that's probably when it really doesn't feel good. Um, and then your exceed also, you kind of just end up getting a bit less value out of it because you already play you spent a lot of you already spent a lot of those resources boosting. You already played all of those boosts and spent those resources, so you're not getting them back, right?
Right. Sure.
Um,
Okay. So we've got boosts that are better after exceed, but still viable beforehand. So yeah, let's get into the boosts then. Where do we want to start? Do we want to just go from? You already started talking about redistribute a little bit. If we want to start there, so this is adding any number of cards from your gauge to your hand, then add that many cards from your hand to your gauge. Add the top card of your discard pile to your gauge. Okay, so that's a lot of movement of cards. So you're
yeah,
taking things that you already hit with or put in your gauge to your hand. So you're redistributing, hence the name.
yeah.
You're recurring options from your hand that you already your gauge that you already hit with your hand. And then you just trade those cards from your hand into your gauge, so you're not actually losing any gauge. And
Mhm.
then you get a gauge for free on top of that to spend the card that the because you just spent Scuttle Slam as a boost, so it refunds itself as to your gauge as well.
Well, you get the top card of your discard pile to your gauge before it goes to your discard.
Oh, sure.
Before
Okay.
the Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is mostly for recursion, and also you get an extra gauge at the end of the transaction too.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I guess the question is, I know that the meme is blocked, but in order to evaluate this, how good are my recursion options, and what am I recurring? Is it just strictly what I need in the situation, or are there rules of thumb or guidelines or obvious picks that I should be thinking about?
I mean, you always have like like sweep and focus are always reliable, like just
Yep.
for light and for reading. Getting EXs, like being able to play EXs if you like, either by let's say you landed your EX treasure coin, they're both going to be in your gauge, and
Yep.
maybe if you get into a situation where you can threaten it, you can just play this, and then all of a sudden you have the EX treasure coin in your hand, right? Your
Right.
opponent's going to have to move in or something to probably react to it.
I was wondering because you mentioned for both of these cards, I think, both Dive Charge and Treasure Coin, that they benefit a lot from EXs, and I wasn't finding anything in his kit that was going to let me get those EXs other
mm,
than like a good mulligan or something. But Redistribute is an ability to kind of curate my hand to get EXs when I need them, um, which seems very powerful. So is that kind of part of what I'm using this for? Is to fish it's good treasure night. I'm I'm quitting the show. But is that what I'm kind of looking to use this card for, or this boost for, is to get EXs as I need them?
I mean, like depending on what's in your hand and what's in your gauge. If you happen to, I mean, yeah, I guess if you happen to play, like, let's say if you happen to play a boost to hit the first dive charge and it's still in your gauge, then definitely something you could do is, if you have cards in your hand you don't want, you can use redistribute to get the EX dive charge back for your second one, right? For your second use of dive charge. And like, but I think part of it is like depending on like when you exceed and when you play, or if you're playing an ultra, you're gonna have to spend gauge. So there's gonna be some like curation of like what's like what's left in your gauge for you to redistribute with,
Right.
um and if like maybe it could be like sometimes like you don't necessarily want to be keeping dive charge in here just for the sake of being able to get the X dive charge later, because like maybe you want to keep focus, or maybe you want to keep block, and those are like more
More
like more
valuable. Right.
they're more valuable played like by themselves, right?
Right. But if you already have a dive charge in your hand, or if you already have an assault in your hand or something, and you can make an EX out of it with redistribute, um, it's also as many cards as there are in your gauge if you want. Like
Yeah,
you can
multiple, yeah.
cycle multiple of them out, so you don't even necessarily have to choose if you have the resources to pay for it. Um, so how often are you redistributing per game? Like Scuttle Slam, it sounded like was a good attack to deal with Spike in particular, but like the ability to recur many
Yeah.
good options at once seems very, very powerful. Um, is that a more pressing concern most of the time for Treasure Knight?
Um, I I I think the idea of recursion is definitely. I mean, like recursion is like definitely a very powerful effect, and I think it's easier to kind of like it's easier to place to place more value on this card having redistribute rather than the Scuttle Slam aspect.
Right.
Um, but I guess it really depends on like the specific game, I guess. Because like like it's also, I mean, like the way, I guess the way I play, I don't know if it's just because like I don't um like the way I manage macro of the character, just I don't, it's not like geared like specifically enough towards redistribute. But I end up with situations where I end up playing Scuttle Slam pretty often as a reaction to something. Um, but yeah, like there are definitely, if you have like sweep focus, or EX options, or like maybe even anchor launch or like EX treasure coin
Right.
in your gauge, then like that like it can definitely be very like potent to
Right.
just play redistribute, or even or just like even block, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, it, I play redistribute to get the blocks back in my hand is kind of a meme, but is that just a good play? Like, how much truth is there to the fact that block is Treasure Knight's best card, and can I just recur block a whole bunch and win games that way?
I mean, I've never actually won games off of doing that. Hypothetically, it's uh maybe if the game is going in a way where maybe deck out is like for your opponent is an option, you can stall them out somehow. Like it's something you can consider for sure.
Okay.
Or if your opponent just has has like a limited number of threats that deal a lot of damage, then recurring blocks is something you can consider. But it's definitely I think it actually. I mean, I feel like it's more niche than it sounds,
Right.
because it's easy to just go, oh my god, my blocks are 4 armor and I can recur them. Like I'm just gonna do it, which is like I mean, I guess it's something you can uh fall back on, I suppose. But
Right.
it's not. It doesn't like actually progress you. It doesn't actually help you like because blocks like unlike armor boosts, like because armor like so with armor boosts, you play them in strikes and you're trading up, which means it doesn't armor like when you boost armor, it doesn't help you deal more damage, but it helps you. But then it does
It
help
help,
you win. It does help you trade up during
it helps
strikes,
you
right?
trade better. Oh, but block isn't trading ever.
Yeah, you're never dealing with damage to your opponent when you're when you're
Right.
playing. Yeah, when you're
You're
playing.
you're
When you're playing through a strike with block, right?
right. So if you have the ability to put armor on something that has power, now you're actually progressing towards an end state. But block is
Yeah,
just holding steady unless you're trying to deck them out. That's actually a really good point.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
I guess. I mean, I guess if you're using block to pair, if you're recurring block to let's say you blocked earlier in the game, but and then you want your parry back, that's also like a
sure.
good situation where you might want to consider recurring block to actually
Right.
parry something.
So it sounds like redistribute is very flexible, and it might just be play style where it's like some people might say you play redistribute unless your opponent keeps on giving you reasons to have to play Scuttle Slam, or other people
Yeah,
might say only play redistribute if you have really good things in your gauge that you need to recur. But either way, this is something that you'd
yeah,
have to consider because it is a powerful effect.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, and I guess with the value proposition on actually playing Scuttle Slam, I know it's just like 3 damn, like it is very like weak on itself, but if you kind of ascribe to the school that like I can put some armor on and suddenly I hit you and I have good trades, then like 3 power is, it's fairly low, but if you have like 3 armor, then
Sure.
all of a sudden it's like, well, if you just defend with it, you might just be an even trade, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that all makes sense. Okay. So, useful as both, despite the fact that redistribute kind of presents a more obvious use case for it. What about? So we already talked a little bit about high tide and as a way to set up other cards. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about high tide uh, before we move on to other ones?
it's just it has its value. It has its like its life value, which is the 2 armor, like the life differential value, or
Right.
delta value, I guess. And it also has utility in the form of letting you set up your spikes and treasure coins and aggro calls more easily.
Right.
And those are both like one is like high, one is like good value, and the other one is like high impact, right?
Yeah.
And I guess there's not too much more to add, I suppose.
That makes sense. Well, and
There
this
might even be situations, I guess, where like you can even make your anchor launches more reliable if they're far enough. If they're like, I don't know, let's say,
if they're hanging out at range 2 a lot, or if they're if they have a really strong option at range 3 that doesn't hit at range 4 or something.
yeah, or like if you're in range 5, then they can dive in and then you push them out.
Right. Right. Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, and I mean the fact that you specifically mentioned high tide when we were talking about the specials. You mentioned high tide as being a boost that you probably want to play more often than the attack. You didn't do that for any of the other specials. Like you specifically called out high
Yeah.
tide while we were talking about the special attack. So it seems like this is actually a pretty powerful effect. So it's worth considering that.
I think this is like the one that's it applies to the most situations.
Okay.
You also have, I mean, these two are kind of similar. They just have less like utility, like they just have less pure utility in terms of letting you confirm, like in terms of in terms of how relevant they are to the specific strike at hand, right?
Sure.
Because they don't, these two don't. I mean, maybe if you need a third point of armor, then like that could be utility.
Right.
But otherwise, like they don't help. They don't increase the chance that uh, that your attack will be able to hit like this
Yeah.
strike. They provide other value.
Yeah, they don't really set up new attacks or anything like that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so that is we've covered High Tide, we've covered Scuttle Slam.
Yep.
How about let's put these back over here because we'll talk about them in a second, and then these three. How about and you were just talking about salvage operation. So +1 power, +1 armor. It's
Yeah.
another armor boost.
Yeah.
And more recursion. Return a card from your discard pile to your hand, so not from your gauge, so it's from a different source.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess same questions about what your recurring apply. It's mostly just whatever you want it to be, or whatever
Yeah.
you need it to be at the time.
A big one for this is actually reading. Like actually focus for reading, because like you can either play it like if your opponent's striking into you, then it's going to be your turn next, and all of a sudden
Oh,
you can just pull focus and
because
play reading.
this is an attack that you or a boost that you do on your turn. This could be done on defense.
Yeah, exactly.
I
And I think
see.
there's actually, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's how many other effects like let you recur cards in the middle of strikes.
Yeah.
And that, especially one that you can staple onto like, any attack. And I'm not sure if there's that many.
Yeah, so
But
now, unless they happen to play assault or something, coming in on my turn, I've got a card in my hand from my discard pile that I can do something
yeah,
with.
yeah.
Okay.
if you ever you can also find it's also possible like if you boost this, you can play assault. You can play reading and then play assaults. Then if they don't have a if they show you their hands, you can gain advantage and then get reading back and then reading them again.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. Okay, that makes sense. Interesting. All right. There's a lot more to this than I thought there was. So being able to recur a card during a strike, and then have another turn afterward is a much bigger deal. So all right. So yeah, we guaranteed readings. People love guaranteed readings, so that's awesome. Any other, and I mean, +1 power, +1 armor, 2 delta. Cool. You want to be trading anyway. It's
Yeah.
helping set up your other slightly frailer cards. So everything that you probably want. Um, any other cool combos that I'm not thinking about from this hit effect?
Let's see. I mean, aside from reading, it's kind of just like getting like finding cards for the situation, finding cards that give you good value, like EXs or sweep or
Right.
um, anchor launch or what have you. Yeah, it's just it's kind of just basic like I mean, well, basic's a weird word maybe to use, but it's just
Standard recursion. Other than that one combo.
yeah, it's just getting getting back your good cards, whatever,
Right.
and those good cards could be just cards that are reliable. That I mean, you're a character that wants to trade, so like cards like focus and sweep and block are always going to be like pretty good.
Yep.
Um, you can even get, I guess you can get back armor boosts. You can get back High Tide, for
Yep.
example, and just
Yep.
boost it again. Um, yeah, I mean, his recursion is pretty straightforward because I mean, well, like I mean, I kind of say straightforward, even though I'm not giving like specific answers, but and straightforward in the sense of like his game plan is pretty straightforward. So like, um, what and then a lot of his and then like a lot of his cards are either like a lot of his good cards are either kind of just like armor boosts or they're attacks which are good at trading or like copies of attacks which help you build the X's and then
Right.
so you have
And
you can have a lot of different options to choose from depending on what's in your discard pile and what you need in the given moment. But
yeah.
what you want to accomplish is generally pretty similar game to game.
and
Um,
and and this also kind of fits in with what you were saying about he's very good at picking apart an opponent's weak point after later into the game when
yes,
he's
exactly. Yeah,
he's
yeah,
moving to a range that they can't deal with. Oh, but I don't have the card that lets me really really threaten at range 6 when my opponents run out of fireballs. Yes, you do.
yeah,
Or uh yes, you
yeah,
do if you hit with it and it's in your gauge but not when it's in your discard pile. Like you have ways to get these cards back, and that's what this should be
yeah,
used for.
yeah.
So is it kind of like uh a similar proposition to Scuttle Slam? Like Treasure Coin sounded like it was a good card to hit with. We like that card, we get a free gauge out of it. Same thing where like sometimes I'll use Treasure Coin, sometimes I'll use Salvage Operation, or is it weighted in one direction or another?
I think it depends on if you draw the EX or not. If you draw the
Okay.
EX, then like it just feels good in my experience to find a situation I can just play the EX treasure coin and get a lot of value out of that.
Right.
But if I just draw one copy and and then I just and it feels good to just boost it, and I'm willing to just boost it, and then when I draw the second copy, I can just boost that as well,
Yep.
or I can just like play high tide, boost high tide, and I hit the second copy, and then get the first
Get the
copy
other one
like
the other one
yeah,
back from my discard pile
yeah,
into my gauge, and then recur it with redistribute or
yeah,
something. Like
yeah.
in this game, I'm like, my new win condition for Treasure Knight is to hit Treasure Coin as many times as possible. Okay, cool. So
Just like a Mario
that's
game at that point, right?
right. Yeah, you just keep on hitting the question mark block over and over and
Yeah.
over again. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, so that's redistribute high tide. What about sunken treasure? So +2 power at the start of the opponent's turn. Place the top card of your deck face down under this boost. When this boost leaves play, add all cards under it to your hand.
hmm
So you're not drawing them until after the boost leaves play.
Yeah.
But every time your opponent passes a turn, you take a card from the top of your deck. It's not going into your hand. It's going underneath this boost. And then when they get rid of the boost, or when you hit with it, any way it leaves play, all those cards just come to your hand at once.
Yep.
What? Okay, so
You're also not able to check what the face down cards are
right.
until they go to your hands.
Okay. Okay. So what is the value there? I'm getting a lot of cards all at once later on, rather than, or assuming they pass the turn a couple of times, rather than um getting them piecemeal over several turns that I would be getting by drawing them. But I guess I'm drawing them anyway, or I'm drawing cards anyway, because if this card is still in play because I boosted it, and then my opponent passes, and then
Yeah.
I boost another card, or I move or something, I drew a card. So at the end of all of this, I'm going to have a huge number of cards in my hand.
Yeah, if your
Oh,
opponent lets it sit there for a number of
right.
turns,
And
that's
so, and
what happens.
I guess the thing that I just understood is that they would make the card leave play by striking, or I would
Yeah,
strike, and
yeah,
hand size is not checked
yeah,
after a strike. So I actually get all those cards. I don't just have to discard them.
yeah.
Okay. Um, and I guess the +2 power is to dissuade my opponent from striking in the first place.
I would actually. Well, the way I approach this boost is actually I think I just boost it if I need +2 power, and then the extra cards
Okay,
are kind of a bonus on top.
that makes sense. I'm not. You're not trying to set up like a temporary big hand guile thing. +2 power
Yeah,
is good enough on its own, and then you get
yeah,
you get an extra card or two afterward.
yeah. I generally like like I feel like I have a lot of ways to set up dive charge, and then EX dive charge is good. So I don't end up boosting it as often as maybe the value on it suggests it should be boosted.
Okay,
But if I just want +2 power and I don't have fierce, then I can just boost this, and then especially like, and then I'll get at least one card out of it, and then if I let's say my opponent decides to pass turn, I can play more boosts, or and then they'll eventually, and then if they keep not striking into you, then then I'll get more cards out of it. But
right.
you don't necessarily want to wait and wait just to get more cards out of it. You want to definitely be able to capitalize on striking to
Yeah.
get value out of the stats that you're getting. Out of maybe you'll have this boosted, and then you might have you might have either this boosted on top, or any one of any one of these armor, any one of these boosts, right? Um you want to get you don't want a situation where your opponent can, if you have two boosts out, you don't want a situation where your opponent can just diffuse it and you get no value except for the cards underneath.
Right.
um but also just like so the armor boosts make your attacks more reliable. So like it makes your attacks more reliable in the sense that you some of your cards with wonky defenses now have enough defenses to counter hit back.
Sure.
And also your EX has become a lot more reliable because now they have just three defenses, at least three or more defenses, just with this one boost and the EX, right?
Right.
With this one it would be 2 armor, 1 guard, and then with this it would be when you play with an EX, it's 3 armor and 1 guard, and so
Yep.
forth, right?
Yep.
So, and then when you have power on top, they hit really hard, right? Your attack hits really hard.
Right. So okay,
And
this is in the same way that you would. It sounds like in the same way that you would confirm an attack with a speed boost and then increase your payout with a power boost,
yeah,
and the power boost goes second. You're doing the same thing with armor. You're making an attack consistent, and then you're paying out more by boosting +2 power second.
yeah, it can also go in the other order, I think, for Treasure Knight, because well, aside, I mean, I guess if you have an EX, for example, you can just boost this, and then maybe your opponent's incentivized to strike into you because they don't want you to draw as many cards, right?
Right.
For
Sure.
example. So funnily enough, that's kind of the other. It's kind of
The
what you were saying,
yeah.
but the other way around.
Right.
But also if you're at far ranges, there was it was a tournament game where I played against Banazama. I was up against Bang, and I happened to I managed to cross out to like range 5, right?
Yeah.
And then now I'm threatening anchor launch, right?
Right.
Um, but so then I could play anchor launch, but Bang, he was playing Bang, and Bang has a slow, has polarizing blast jujitsu, which has 6 defenses.
Yep.
So what I could do is I can boost this, and then now my anchor launch hits for 8 power, which then might incentivize my opponent to like spend a turn moving in, right?
Right.
And
And
then
now you're getting a card out of it too.
yeah. So now I'm getting at least 1 card, but like
Yep.
so now I could
now
I could strike, or I can play
you
armor
can
boost, right?
play an armor
Yeah,
boost to make it more consistent. I see. Okay.
yeah.
That makes sense.
And then you're
But
getting 2 cards out of this.
right.
Yeah,
And as you mentioned, all of this math as if you're even playing it as a boost at all, because dive charge is a pretty consistent shape and you like to play it.
yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Cool. So that is salvage operation, that's high tide, that's scuttle slam. I guess the last one is anchor zip.
Yeah.
So move up to 4, then draw 2 cards. Okay. So yeah, so this seems more straightforward than his other ones at least, but tell me
Yeah.
about this.
It's if you I think it's if you're like in a in a bad or a not ideal situation, and you don't think that anchor launch would be useful either in the matchup or in like the sort of short to medium term,
Right.
you can just boost it and move to a position, move to a range that you want to be at, or get out of the corner and then just refill your hand essentially, right?
Right.
Especially if you're exceeded, then you don't have to pay the force costs,
Right.
and then yeah, you just simply draw 3 cards and move to where you want to move.
Interesting that you move first. A lot of times when you see these
Oh,
boosts,
right.
you draw cards and then you can move based on what you've drawn. But for this time,
Right.
for anchor zip, you actually have to commit.
I wonder if that's just like a what's the right word? If that's just like a oversight of season 4, like
It
development
could be.
process.
I wonder, but so in terms of it as written, the then means that you have to draw the 2 cards second, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, cool. But yeah, this one seems pretty simple. You play it when you're not in a good position, and you get out of there. Anchor launch is a pretty solid card, and you're hoping to hit with it. But
yeah.
sometimes you'll need to play this. It sounds like.
Yeah, if you yeah, I mean, generally speaking, like unless you're playing risky anchor launches, you're probably not. I mean, if you're not playing risky anchor launches, then they'll probably be in your hand, and then there might be a point in the game where you feel like, well, I don't think I'm. I mean, I need to get some more value like immediately, and
Yeah,
this anchor launch is not doing much in my hand, so
yeah. Or
boost it.
I'm up against Zangief or something, and I really don't. He's at
Yeah,
range 1.
yeah,
I
yeah,
really don't want to
exactly.
deal with it.
Yeah,
Time to
yeah,
go. He's never going to let me actually hit with anchor launch, and if he does, I'm going to pull him to range 2 anyway. I don't
yeah,
want that.
yeah,
So time
yeah,
to run away. Sure. Okay. So that's his special boosts then. Should we also? I guess we should move on to ultras. Where did the
yeah.
rest of his cards go? Hold on a
Uh,
second.
oh, here they
There we
are.
go. Yeah. Tell me about. You want to start with attacks?
Um, well, actually, we can start with boosts because
Cool. Okay, we're
yeah.
already talking about him.
I think there are also more. Well, I mean, this one is not worded straightforwardly, but the effect is pretty straightforward. I mean, in terms of like what you get out of it is pretty straightforward.
Right. So
um,
the new theme on this show is let's see if Gearface can parse the oddly worded season 4 cards. Hit, spend up to 2 force. For each force spent, add the top card of your discard pile to your gauge, then draw a card for every 2 cards in your gauge. Okay, so you spend up to 2 force. That could be discounted.
yeah,
And then you take something from your discard pile to your gauge, and then draw a card for every 2 cards in your gauge. Not every 2 cards you put there. It's just every 2 cards that are in your gauge, period.
yeah, yeah,
So it
yeah,
could be a pretty big hand reload, and you're
yeah,
guaranteed or mostly guaranteed to have at least 2 cards in there because you just put 2 cards in there from your discard
yeah,
pile.
yeah,
Okay. So you get gauge and cards. That all seems good to me.
yeah. So it's a 4 each loop. So basically, for every force you spend, you do the whole effect each time. So like if you spend 2 force, and one of them is going to be for free, then it'll check the for the then draw a card for every 2 cards in your gauge. It'll essentially go through that. You'll check twice
Okay.
essentially.
So I got it
Um,
wrong again.
oh, how did you read it?
I was thinking about it as it would check it once. So
Okay.
you're saying all right. I spend one force. I add the top card of my discard pile to my gauge. I look to see what's in my gauge. I draw a card for every 2. Then I
Yeah.
spend another force and do all of that again.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it is easy to miss. Because like yeah, it's also like it's just the way it's worded and like maybe not everyone is too familiar with like how for each loops work, I
Yeah.
guess.
So I
Um,
appreciate that I consistently misread these, but in a way where I'm
it's not your
undervaluing.
fault.
Oh,
I mean, yeah.
first of all, I'm fine if it is my fault. That's all right with me. But I like that I'm undervaluing them. I like that I keep on reading them and being
Okay.
like, this seems okay, I guess. But then it turns out they're better. Like I did the same thing with his exceed ability, where it's actually each individual time he's spending
Mm,
force, not like
right.
per turn or per strike. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I think I think
he's
I think I think for his UA, if it was once per strike, it would probably say once during the strike, or
right,
when spending force, something like that.
right,
I'd presume.
right. So okay, so what is the value of secure vault here? So I'm getting a lot of cards. I'm getting a lot of gauge. Um, I'm also putting cards from my discard pile into my gauge. Can I recur them with redistribute? Can I is it are you mostly using this to get gauge and get cards, or do you have like other combos in mind when you're using it?
I mean, I don't know if I end up boosting it that often, but I think the main reason to that you would want to boost it is to get the gauge. And that also means that if you're trying to exceed as soon as possible, the a lot of the times you would boost this is before you exceed. So you would pay
Right,
the force cost on the printed on the card itself.
right,
And generally you want to boost like these, which like only get you value if you hit. You want to do it in a situation where you're feeling pretty comfortable or confident that you're gonna be able to reliably hit if your opponent decides to strike in 2, right?
right, right,
Um, and so like yeah, so early game, if you maybe go to range 1, or like you have an EX, or you have some boost setup that lets you hit reliably, you can kind of boost this to accelerate your gauge economy, and then also draw some cards on top of it. Like I mean, it's not going to be that many more cards. Like it's probably it's 1 card for every 2 cards in your gauge, so you might draw like 1 or 2 cards out of it, right? Um, if you're doing it early game. Um, it's not going to be that many cards, but it's still. I mean, it's still nice. It kind of refunds the force cost that you paid, and then you get to gauge, right?
right.
Um, or and I guess well, it rather refunds the force cost you pay here, and then if you're spending 2 force, you generate 1 for free, but you're still spending for the second force. You're spending a force, discarding a
Right.
card from somewhere. So you can almost think of the second part as like like a rebate off of the off of a rebate of the force you
Of of
spent to generate the
of
gauge.
of the cost of the force, right? Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And then if you're exceeding, if you played it later in the game, you're actually getting more resources out of it because you might have more gauge by that point, or you might be
I mean, I think
uh
the only time when you might draw a lot of cards, I guess, is if I don't know. I guess if I mean, you're either you decide to build a lot of gauge and not exceed for some reason, or you've exceeded. You've exceeded, but then you decide to just build up a lot of gauge for some reason. I guess maybe
okay.
you want to play this other ultra, um, 2 times. I haven't. I don't really see like a good situation where like you would want that to happen, just because first of all, like this ultra is pretty good.
Okay.
You definitely want to, I mean, either you can find situations where you can play it proactively, but also there's probably a bunch of situations where it's a good response to something. So
So
this is a pretty good ultra. I would if you're not boosting this like in the early game to get the gauge to exceed, and then like if you and
sure.
it's a point of the game where you've exceeded, you'd probably want to spend like you're building gauge. You probably want to play this card to play the
Yeah.
attack better
If
than the
if
boosts.
if you have enough gauge to get a ton of cards out of Secure Vault into your hand, you have enough gauge to play Angler Call. It sounds
Yeah,
like. Okay.
yeah, exactly.
And to segue into it, so Angler Call is a 3 gauge ultra, hits 2 to 4, as you mentioned, has a lot of synergy with High Tide.
Yeah, yep.
Has 11 delta,
Yeah,
and it's stun immune. Uh, that seems like a lot.
yeah. It's packs a punch.
How important is this card? Am I like really, really trying to hit this card to win the game, the way that I would with like a Hosenka on Chun Li, or is it less important than it looks?
It's kind of like a yes and no. I don't think it's as important as Hosenka, or it's not as like it's not as like scary of a game closer. But it's
Right.
definitely like something you want to keep in your back pocket. And if you have a chance to use it, it can be really potent. Um, yeah, but like you don't, but also like you don't. I don't think you need to prioritize like aiming to play this as much as Hosenka.
As much as other like really, really crazy ultras, it's
Yeah,
still just
it's
gonna
not. Yeah, it's not like Gemerald. It's not like Tager's Genesect Emerald. I mean Emerald Genesect Emerald Tager Buster, right? Which
right.
is
Yeah,
yeah. Or I mean I can't think of a lot of other or like maybe like Metsu
Master
Doken
sure,
for
sure
free.
yeah, something that is like sort of kit defining for him. Like so, it's just a big strong attack that he has.
Yeah,
But
I think it's I mean if you happen to have if you draw late in the mid late game and you have the and then you're in the particular matchup, you think you have a good chance of hitting it, and then, if you happen to still have high tides left later on in the game that you can compare it with, then that's something. And then maybe the game will kind of go towards the game state where it's like really really good to hit this, and like I would think about hitting it. But if you draw it early in the game, you can feel free to like feel free to like boost it to get gauge, or just to change cards to to draw
you know,
um
to
cards that will help you get gauge
to
to
get
like to
to
win
get his
neutral and to like to play
his
neutral and to win strikes, right?
yeah, and to leverage his sort of more efficient abilities to get a big hand reload or a big movement or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
even like late game, like if you're exceeded, but this is not like a good if like in the current game state, it doesn't feel like a good attack to play, or in a given matchup, you don't it's not a good attack to play. You can just I mean instead of boosting it, you can just like because if you're okay, so if you're boosting this with the idea to which like after you exceed, right? Like if you kind of ask yourself like why do I like should I boost this? Well, what does it give you? It gives you gauge, and it gives you gauge and it gives you cards. But then if
right,
I'm boosting this, like I'm
you
getting
could just
gauge, but what am I
you,
spending gauge on after I've already exceeded, right?
right,
It's gonna
and you could just uh take the change cards action with
exactly,
this
yeah.
and or yeah, okay, so that makes sense. So it sounds
Yeah.
like in the early game it's more likely to be a boost. In the late game, if you can hit it, please hit with it. If you can't hit with it, it's force.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool.
It's also yeah, and also it has to be armor actually, which means that if you if you're really desperate to like not die to an attack, you can just you have that happen to have the 3 gauge, you can just play this
Yeah,
for 3 armor, and that might swing things in your favor.
right.
It might help you, it might prevent you from dying, which then gives you a chance to still win the game.
Yep. That makes sense. Just like squeeze out one more turn out of the game or something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the other, if you want to do attack or boost first on this one.
We can do the boost. The boost is pretty straightforward. It's just 3 armor. It's like somewhat expensive, but Treasure Knight just wants to confirm its hits and then trade up, so it does its job. To pretty to pretty reasonable standard.
Yep.
It's
And
just that yeah,
and
if you compare it to like let's say Tager or other characters having a 3 armor boost, theirs is just less expensive. Whereas this
right,
one, if you're not exceeded, you have to pay a total of 2 force, like 1 for the printed, and then the effect says you may spend 2 force, and if you do, plus 3 armor, so you only have to pay 1 force, but that's still a total of 2.
right,
And then if you're exceeded, then you have to pay 1. But also,
right.
this is an
Well,
ultra
it's
boost,
also an ultra
so
boost, right? So it's still
yeah,
two more
yeah,
on top of that. So it's
yeah,
very expensive.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, comparatively, it's relatively expensive. So I mean, it probably could afford. I mean, in terms of like when they were balancing the card, they probably could afford it to be cheaper. Um, but like it still does its job. So
Right.
like if you, there are a lot of situations where where you want to boost it.
Right. So
Um,
as you mentioned, 3 armor on top of another card that has some power on it makes your trades very, very good.
yeah,
Okay. Um and then as the attack, range is calculated from the center space of the arena. So no matter where you are, it hits these 3 spaces only,
yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah,
And it can hit for 8 if you
yeah,
wanted to. Okay.
yeah.
Uh
Go ahead.
no, I was going to ask, like, so this seems like if they happen to be there, it's quite scary, but you also have a lot of abilities to control the board state. You can also move
Mhm.
people around and stuff. You have high tide,
Yeah.
you have various push effects. How feasible is it to hit with this card?
I think it depends on the game, depends on the matchup. It's yeah, I mean, I think a fair amount, like there's a fair amount of games where it's pretty feasible, and then there are also games where where it's like it's like less so. And I think this is a card that you really want to play if you're gonna end the game with it, because otherwise it's pretty expensive to get
Yeah,
the
if
full
you're gonna if
eight power.
3 gauge and 3 force is
Yeah,
still for 8 power is still quite a lot. Even
yeah,
at speed 5, like that's difficult
yeah,
to justify unless you're
yeah,
well, unless the
yeah,
opponent has 8 or 7 life or something. Then you're feeling pretty
yeah.
good about it. Okay,
You also might be spending like some turns or resources just to
set
put
it up.
you and the opponent into a position where it actually hits.
Right.
So there's also that to consider. So if you're not killing your opponent with it, you can end up spending a lot of you can end up committing a lot to for like maybe not debatably not enough value, but I mean, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
depends on the game, I guess.
If the game ends though, it's enough value.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but for from what I'm hearing about these ultras, like, this is pretty good if you can hit with it. This might not be worth it unless you can close the game out. The boosts on them are both pretty good but not overwhelming. So, once he's exceeded, you're kind of right that he isn't really building up towards anything other than ultras, and those
Yeah.
ultras are not that incredible. Is his gauge really just going towards expenditures to using his character ability to kind of make his game plan cheaper?
I think you still definitely. I think you do want to keep Gage around, just like depending on which of these two ultras you have left in the matchup. Um, at least like one of these two will probably be useful. Usually, I mean, for me it ends up being I think it ends up being Agricole more of the time.
Right.
But I tend to like try to keep the Gage so that I can play these ultras, but then um, let's say we get to a point in the game where we're kind of at like both at pretty low life, and I don't think like it's useful to play the ultras anymore. Then I can just do a big CC and just like get a new, or I can like reach, just get a new hand, or um, or maybe like especially like a big CC through my reshuffle. I guess
Right.
that could be a pretty good
Right.
option.
To do
Um,
some action compression or something, so you're not taking the reshuffle action.
Yeah. But otherwise, I mean, I think especially Agricole, like, it's a good option to have, even if you're not quite aiming to play it as much as like you would say, like let's say Hosenko or Emerald or Genestic Emerald Taker Buster.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say like I definitely wouldn't say like I definitely do want to have the gauge to play at least one of these two ultras. Um, so I wouldn't say his gauge is not useful.
Right.
um, it's just that it's not. It's just one part of the game plan.
Okay.
It's not. It's not like necessarily like the capstone or
Right.
like the like yeah. I mean, there might be games where this can kind of because like I guess Angry Call is like a little bit more awkward hit with. I mean, and so I mean, Maelstrom Chess is to an extent, but it is 5 speed, so there's some situations where it'll end up being like on curve or above curve, and
Right. They
that
can't
does help.
dive or assault out or something like
Yeah,
that, and
yeah,
you can maybe deal with it that way.
yeah.
Okay. Um and so talking about economy, obviously he's got a very good one because he's got reduced force costs. In terms of his gauge economy, though, other than treasure coin, he's got a lot of things that interact with his gauge, but he doesn't really have anything that puts extra
Yeah.
things into it except for
Redistribute and
yeah,
secure vaults.
yeah, redistribute does it. And but even then, like redistribute is mostly taking stuff out as well. It just
Yeah.
gives you like
Yeah.
one more afterward.
Yeah.
Um, so over the course of a game, I'm mostly relying on my attacks to build that gauge. So it and the first three are probably earmarked to exceed. And then in most of your games, would you say that you are building up enough gauge to hit one ultra, and then you have a little bit more overage to cover your costs, or are you building up more gauge than that?
Oh, you mean like I mean after if I do hit one ultra, am I building up more gauge? Am I building up gauge to hit a second one? Is that?
Yeah. So basically, is it like, all right? So this is 3 gauge. This is 3 gauge.
Hmm?
Is 6 gauge kind of what you're shooting for over the course of a whole game, or is 7 or 8 gauge realistic to hit? Not all at once, but just over the course of the game, is generating 7 or 8 gauge realistic, or should I be shooting for just enough to hit this ultra and exceed? What is realistic to hope for?
Um, a lot of like really long grinding games, Treasure Knight.
Hmm.
Um, so I could there are like a fair share of games where I probably end up getting uh a number of gauge that like a total number of gauge that's more than 6. I don't know if that's just because of like the particular opponents I played against, or
Right. Well, but
um
he's also tanky enough that he can
yeah,
afford
yeah,
to stretch a game out over more turns if he needs to. So maybe you have more gauge online that way. But it's not a
yeah,
situation where, like, there are some characters who build gauge like crazy, and a 3 gauge exceed and a 3 gauge ultra is nothing, right? They're like, cool, I'll
yeah,
do that and then still have plenty left over. He's not like that.
yeah, yeah. It's
He
yeah,
needs some amount of moderation even with his good economy, because his economy is from force, not
yeah,
gauge.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think after he exceeds, it still feels like, oh, I don't I want more gauge so that if I want to play my ultras, they're online. And then I might get to a point where like I might have like where like maybe like I don't find a perfect situation to play my ultras, but I don't want to but I still want to keep them live. So like I might end up having like 5 gauge and have an
Right.
ultra in my hands.
And you'll
Um,
CC two or something, or you'll move using two of the force in your
yeah.
gauge or something like that.
I
Okay.
think at that point I might decide like, oh, am I gonna just spend some of my gauge to do that, or like is all of a sudden I decide like, okay, well, I'm actually not gonna play the ultras this game. I could just do a big CC and
Right.
yeah,
And
yeah,
have lots of options live. All right. So it's flexible,
yeah,
like a lot of the stuff that Treasure Knight does is
yeah,
flexible.
yeah, yeah. But it's
Okay.
kind of a interesting. I mean, it's like a bit of a. It's like I think for the first like 2/3 of the game, it does feel like he uh he does his gauge is a bit precious.
Yeah, it's
And also
interesting because
like
his economy is so good, but he does build gauge like a normal exceed character. That's
yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
cool tension.
Yeah. And then because of redistribute, he also he also cares about like what's in his gauge.
Right.
So yeah, because like sometimes you might. I mean, I don't think there's too many. I mean, I'm trying to think. Well, yeah, there might be situations, I guess, where you have the 3 gauge and but you really want to keep a particular one. Like you feel like you can afford to like wait a bit longer to exceed, and like maybe because like you don't feel the need to play like your special boost anytime soon, like right away, or you really want to take advantage of the kicker, which is when you
We didn't
exceed
even
pull to 3.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, we
Uh,
didn't.
yeah. What is the value of that? Is just getting things into a range where your hand can hit, cornering your opponent. Like,
Yeah, both of those. It's really
okay,
good against zoners. Like I think Treasure Knight is like pretty good against zoners, both because of his kicker and because of his exceed mode gives him more efficient movement, and because of anchor launch.
right,
Like all three of those things, just give him a lot of like anti-zoning options.
right,
Um, yeah, but also like against characters that are not zoners, you can pull them into the corner, and
right.
that feels nice. Because
That's
if your
always
opponent
pretty
wants to get
powerful.
out, they have to spend a run, or they have to spend like 3/4 straight, and
Right,
you can kind of compare that to like, well, if I have to spend one extra force on a special for the delay my exceed, but I got like 3/4 of value out of like pulling my opponent into the corner,
right.
maybe
Maybe
it's worth it to wait.
wait a turn, sure, to get the value that way. That makes sense.
Yeah, and like I mean, and generally speaking, you're playing these boosts because you feel like you feel like you want to do it because of the tempo of the game, right?
Yeah.
And so in those cases, you might make the decision that it's more valuable for me to play the boost for a little bit more for a little bit extra cost rather than waiting a turn and playing it later for 1 force cheaper. Like so, it depends on like one of the interesting things at that point is the tension in terms of like value versus tempo, I guess.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah. And also just like the pull kicker is like it's both value and tempo in the sense that if you pull if you pull the opponent out of like a good position, then um it can feel like it's good tempo, like pretty good tempo for you.
Right, well, and you're getting a short term and a long term benefit out of it, and if you feel
Yeah.
like you spent your turn well when you use that. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
If you're not like if you don't think you're like moving around, like taking the move action, the change cards action that much, like in the short, don't think you'll be taking it that much in the short term, then you
Delay a
might
little
feel you can afford to. Yeah, you might. Yeah,
to get the most out of your kicker. That makes sense. And I mean,
yeah,
like maybe you've got a handful of normals at the beginning, and you're not even worried about the special boosts yet.
yeah, yeah,
That makes sense. Okay. So, any other kind of like general? Now that we've gone through the whole kit, we've talked a little bit about economy. We've done attacks and boosts. We're starting to kind of like coalesce towards a game plan and how
yeah.
his game functions. Any other like general tips about anything that we haven't covered or any embroidery on stuff that we have covered that you think is important before we move on to like how to deal with his opponent trying to stop him?
I guess Mulligan's kind of important for the character, just because you want your early game to give you options which are kind of robust without needing to play your special boosts.
Right.
And then like you want to draw a lot of your special boosts. You like, I mean, some of them are nice to have like pre-exceed because they give you like they give you the defenses you need to like let you play some of your attacks to get your gauge.
Right.
But oftentimes you can mulligan them away to draw them later after you've exceeded, so that you can play them more efficiently, right? Instead of
Right.
like having them in your hand and kind of feeling like, I don't really want to play it. That kind of feeling.
Right.
Um,
So I'd be mulliganing for normals then. It sounds like mostly, but
Yeah,
any
like that, like dive charge is also good to, because like I mean, at least yeah, like dive charge is good. Dive charge is also good to have in your like early in the game, right? Because like you can just, there's a lot of boosts that it works well with, and then the X is really good. So if you keep it in your opening hands, you'll increase the chance you'll draw the X as soon as possible, right?
Sure, that makes sense.
Um, yeah, yeah, stuff like Treasure Coin you can like mulligan away. Aquamine, it's kind of probably preference. Just because like, I mean, yeah, just because like it is it's an attack. It is a playable attack in response to things that your opponent might play. And the boost is kind of just generally solid. Um, as opposed to like Treasure Coin, which it gives you one less armor, and you need to hit to get the effect, and also you need to have a discard
And you
pile
need
with
to have a discard
cards.
pile, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. Let's see. I guess Angry Claw depends on like um it depends on like how much you value like having it as a actual option to play the ultra with.
Right, later on.
Yeah. Because it doesn't like, I mean, it's nice I mean, it's like if you draw it, then sometimes it's like, okay, I can boost this to get some to generate gauge. But otherwise it's kind of like early game it can feel like a dead card if you don't find a situation where where you want to boost this over like something
Right.
that gives you more utility, right? It just
Right.
doesn't, this card doesn't give you any utility.
Yeah,
So
it's also it's not, if you can't guarantee a hit, like you said, and in the early game you're probably you have a less curated hand, you're less likely to be able to guarantee that hit. It might be tougher to land.
yeah.
Okay.
Um yeah, but like I mean it's kind of like a, what's the like I mean it feels a bit um like counterintuitive because it might feel a bit counterintuitive because the boost is mainly good in like in the early part of the game, but like only if you actually are able to hit, right?
Yeah,
So it's like very context dependent on, like it's very game state dependent on like how, if it's like good or not. Like it's just like it's good value if if you're in a game state where you're feeling comfortable, and it'll just accelerate your game plan so that um so that so that your um
your
you
real
get to
ability
your
faster.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so you're mulling for dive charge. You're mulling for normals. Um, I guess maybe
yeah,
anchor launch because anchor launch seems pretty good.
yeah, yeah. This can be
Uh,
either way. You can
well,
like
yeah,
yeah,
you mentioned it's a very good late game card, especially. So maybe not that.
yeah, yeah, like this is fine to have. I mean, this is also good to have early because it's 3 armor, even if it's expensive, right? It
Right,
depends on, yeah. I mean, I guess you might want to mulligan in a way if you if you think you want to play the ultra in this matchup.
right.
Um, and then this can also kind of go either way because it's if you need a key charge, it's there. Otherwise, it's the EX is pretty good, I think, because it's if you have the EX, it becomes a DP.
It's a DP, sure, but it's probably redistribute is probably better in the late game when you have uh more things in your gauge to play around with.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's up to you if like you yeah. So like redistribute is definitely better in the late game, but there's like pros and cons to whether you want to draw this early or you draw this late. Like I mean,
Okay.
or maybe pros and cons is not necessarily the right word, but there's like different strengths to different
Yeah, yeah.
it has different niches based for if you want to draw it early or late.
You'll have to lean towards different strategies based on when you draw it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. All right. So that's kind of the mulligan logic. What else in terms of like sort of general game plan stuff? If you got anything else?
Okay. So early game, you don't have to be like afraid of just playing dive and then get to range one, and then you can play armor boosts or you can play um, like some of your armor boosts, I guess. Like ideally, like maybe one of these two. And there might be like if you need to confirm a dive charge with it, then it could be worth paying the cost, right? Otherwise, like yeah, just hit hit normals, like hit sweep, hit focus, like play block, play
Yep.
assault. Like assault is always like, you can trade down, but like it's fine. It's fine if you trade. I mean, like, you can play assault, and it's like not, it's not that bad to trade down because you have all these armor boosts that eventually let you trade up, right?
Yeah,
Like to
you'll make
compensate.
it up over the long term, sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but
um,
just get your gauge, basically.
yeah, yeah. And then yeah, I mean, if you just keep playing these options where you're running, if your opponent doesn't have that many good range one options, you can just play options that like get into range one, and then they might play they might play slows into you, but then you have your slows right
Right,
left, right, and then you have all these armor boosts to help you craft attacks that can just kind of reliably hit against most things.
right, and not
Um,
necessarily break through them, but you're reliably trading up.
yeah.
Okay.
And if your opponent has a really good range one game, then like you can see. I mean, well, yeah, you still have your armor boosts if you need them. You might not. Maybe you don't necessarily like kind of just try to get into range one, but you can like do it in mix ups. You can try like range mix ups, I guess, with die versus like treasure coin anchor launch. See, yeah, or you can just find reliable ways to I guess get the 3 gauge, and then once you've exceeded, then you can play the instead of the I will just keep playing boosts up here and brawl you. I will just keep moving to your bad ranges and then force you to, and then just play a game of attrition, I guess.
Yep.
Um, yeah,
Yep. And just keep trading, but trading up. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
make annoying plays, make them deal with your stuff, deal with their stuff. Like it sounds like once you've exceeded your game plan opens up, but your game plan is still very reactive. You're not like gunning for specific
yeah,
options. You're just dealing with what your
yeah,
opponent has better than they can deal with yours.
yeah.
Okay.
And then yeah, and I mean, and like I guess I think some people might think that like, oh, like Treasure Knight just has a lot of armors, but the games last long. Like he kind of deals like a surprising amount of damage.
Yeah, I
Like
mean, you've got, I'm seeing a 5. Both of his ultras hit 6,
Yeah,
or I'm sorry, hit
yeah,
8. Anchor launch deals 6.
yeah. Like this is
Um,
out of his specials. Like only like Scuttle Slam is like really low damage like all the time. Like
right, sure, and the other
because
two at least can buff up to at least. I mean, yeah, 5 or 6 is not bad.
yeah, and then like this like yeah. So this if you hit focus, you're hitting 6, right? And then if you're
Right,
hitting sweep, like most like half the time, like most of the time, you should probably it should probably just be 3 free damage. But if you're not dealing if you're not pushing the full 3, it's going to be like 4 to 6
sure,
power, right? So
right,
you might be trading like okay, let's say you're hitting sweep at 4 power. Normally you're trading down 2, but if you have an armor boost out, then it's just an even trade.
right.
Um, yeah. I mean, you are investing a boost on top of it, but like, I mean, but like, you still have your. I mean, like if somehow it's like the worst case scenario where, um, I guess you're playing dive charge and you're trading with a sweep, and it's an even trade, you still have your like, they're down a sweep, you still have a sweep, so,
Right.
um, it's maybe not the worst. I mean, it's not ideal. It's not great, but like it's not like you're not trading down that much, I guess. Even though I mean, I guess it depends on. Some people might argue that it's bad. It's definitely bad because you did invest the boost and they didn't. But
Right. But also, I mean, that's one strike, and they only have a couple sweeps, and you have a lot more sources of armor. Like
yeah,
you can make up trades over the course of the game, um, and and whittle away at your opponent. It sounds like.
yeah.
Okay.
I do think that's why. Like, I feel like some of Treasure Knight's particularly bad matchups are ones where the opponent has a lot of extra power to like kind of
They
overpower
can
your
just
armor boosts.
blow him up.
Yeah, and then
Right.
it also doesn't help that like his early game is. I mean, yeah, his early game is not the best because like because the card shapes are not that great by themselves, and like the boosts are expensive, right?
Yeah.
And then even after he exceeds it, the opponent has a lot of power. Then it's kind of like you're playing armor to like kind of catch up to the amount of power your opponent has,
Yeah.
and that doesn't feel great.
You're trying to like stop the bleeding instead of like
Yeah,
pulling ahead with it. Right.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. That all makes sense. Cool. So, and excellent segue about, he struggles with people with
yeah.
a lot of power boost on him. And also an early game is a weakness. So in order to beat Treasure Knight, am I pressuring him early when he still doesn't have his whole engine online? Like how am I beating him? And more importantly, what is Treasure Knight doing to mitigate some of that counterplay?
Okay, so like a lot of if you have a lot of plus power, then you might be able to play in a way where you're getting more efficient value out of your cards than out of your boosts or your cards than Treasure Knight is.
Right.
Especially if he has to, if he's not exceeding, he has to spend a force. Um, and ignore armor is also pretty helpful, especially if you have like overhead. Then like
Sure.
you can just react to Treasure Knight playing armor boost by playing overhead.
Yep.
Or at least the existence of ignore armor always makes a lot of like situations still like mix ups, even though he has like armor boost out, right?
Right. Sure.
Um, advantage chains typically tend to be pretty good because you can use advantage to like get turns where Treasure Knight doesn't have an armor boost out, and then play something
Or
really scary into him.
or no ability to do this, no ability
Yeah,
to change the game state so that you can't deal with his stuff. Okay.
yeah,
And it sounds like in order to deal with that stuff, Treasure Knight just needs to use his turns efficiently. He just needs to get the most value. He just has to play good exceed, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
he doesn't really have specific counterplay to those things as much as he does like get your value where you can, win over time, use your parries and techs well, stuff like that.
hmm
Okay, cool. That all makes sense. Uh,
And I guess if you are able to evade, maybe a lot like some of us like evade dive charge with like some attacks that like some of us evade some of his more reliable attacks, then and that might help with like the 9 gauge or just with like stop
right,
like preventing him trading up, I guess.
right.
Um, yeah, I mean, but I guess that's like that's probably more complicated than like what I'm. suggesting here, just because I don't know like the exact like math like between like between like kind of evading some of its like because like you okay so you evade the trade downs, but then usually a lot of evasive characters don't really do a lot of damage, right? So like
Right. Yeah.
maybe
So
you
over the
evade
course
some
of the
strikes, but
game,
then
right.
yeah, the question
I-
is like
if it's like an evasive character who can use gauge really well and they get gauge and you don't or something, then maybe you're
yeah
in more trouble then or something. But they need something other than evasion in order to really make this a problem, it sounds like.
yeah,
Okay.
or if they can like just if they just evade if they could just like keep recurring their evasive cards, like if you're playing as 9 and she can just recur like lapis lazuli and just dodge
Right.
just dodge everything, right? Then that might
Over
be
and
an
over
issue.
again. Right. Okay. Because
Yeah,
you can't get your gauge. And that
yeah,
that limits your ability to stay at places where your
yeah.
opponent can't deal with it. Okay.
But also just like in order to like even if you get your gauge and exceed, in order for Treasure to win the game, he still needs to hit the opponent. Even if he's playing armor boost to help him trade up, he still needs to hit the opponent.
Right.
And if someone has like really good evasive options, then it might like those armor boosts might they might lose like half their like a lot of their value, right? Because
Sure. Yeah.
like
You
you're yeah
in the same way, I mean, like in the same way a power boost would or a speed boost would. Like if you're investing a lot into a strike and you whiff,
yeah
that's really bad. But Treasure Knight's whole game plan is based around trading, and if he's not dealing any damage, even if he's not taking a lot of damage back, he's probably still on the back foot.
yeah. If you can if you're a character that can somehow like out um like uh uh like win the like the option attrition game against Treasure Knight by evading like a lot of his attacks that would normally be reliable, like especially with armor boost out like kind of like dive charge. Like if you
Right.
manage to dodge like two dive charges, then a lot of his remaining attacks aren't the other don't deal the other like you have subtle slam, which like is like on curve and but doesn't really deal a lot of damage, and then
Right.
um
And
and then
every
you have like
a lot of other things are either tough to confirm or kind of situational.
yeah, I mean I guess yeah, if you have like high tide boosts it out, for example, then
Yeah. Then
then like this
suddenly,
combination is like hard it might be hard to dodge it something like this,
right.
but if you can
So
somehow do it, I guess if you can somehow like tech this and then
So
um
in order to counterplay that kind of character, is this where you start to use your recursion in different ways? You know, if you happen to whiff important cards and you need to hit them for this matchup, those are the cards that you bring back. Is that kind of where his counterplay comes from?
um it could be. I don't know if I've played like enough games against like really basic characters where I've like found super good counterplay at least, or just not enough games maybe. But I think like I would probably just say like positioning and tempo. Like usually some of those characters like the most obnoxious options, especially an obnoxious evasion options, also are ones which need to build them up as well.
True.
Like
Yeah.
nine needs to like if nine wants to get like recur like lapis lazuli that can move four spaces all the time, then she needs to have a lot of normals
Right.
engage.
So
I mean,
this
sorry,
might
normals like sealed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
this might be a situation then where Treasure Knight needs to transition out of his like super slow, methodical, grindy play style and kind of pressure the opponent a little bit more to keep them from being able to recur options that consistently beat his.
yeah, possibly, or just play like a more just he probably needs to play like a tighter game. He needs to like execute like just execute playing like exceed at a at a higher
Right.
what's the
Play
word
just
higher efficacy than normal, I guess.
yeah, just play better than his opponent and but
So
like
it's
I mean it's easy to say that, but there are some matchups where you can play worse than your opponent and you can leverage the specific things you have and win. This is not one of those matchups, right? Like you're up against someone who denies Treasure Knight his ability to do Treasure Knight stuff. Now he's got to knuckle down and play stuff really well.
yeah, I mean that's at least that's the feeling I've gotten against in some of those games. I feel like I haven't played enough of those games to really maybe there is um like maybe there is like counterplay that I'm not like specific counterplay that I'm not like
Right.
thinking of, but I think against characters with like evasive, uh, obnoxious evasive options, that's always going to be like kind of troublesome for a lot of the well, maybe not necessarily a lot of the cast, but well, yeah, it's kind of hard to put. It's hard to like kind of like put that point into context, I guess.
Yeah, I get you. And it's going to change based on what kind of evasion the character has and what exact, where exactly they fall on the archetype. Like they might be evasive, but they might be evasive in a way that is all about speed dodges. And well, your stuff doesn't
Yeah,
interact with the speed dodges in that particular way. So it's super hard
yeah,
to say. I get that. All right.
yeah.
So then,
Yeah, like against Chip, it just might. I mean, I don't know if I have any like counterplay I can think of like against Chip, for example. Just like in terms of like specific like counterplay specifically to Treasure Knight, just because um like he has like this boost for utility, and then everything else is kind of just like value.
right.
Um, so there might just be matchups where like if the skill level of the opponent is high enough, then
Treasure
maybe
Knight
there's not that
just
much wiggle
can't
room.
hit anymore.
Um, yeah, and then it comes down to like option management of the two players. So it's not necessarily unwinnable. Like it's
Right.
just or I mean, yeah, I mean it's hard for me to like say because like stuff like option management is like very player specific, right?
Right.
Yeah. Um,
No, I mean for the purposes of this guide and the sort of level of expertise I'm expecting out of the audience who would find this kind of guide helpful, I think that's more than enough. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Um, so we are uh going over about 130 minutes at this point.
oh,
We've crossed the 2 hour mark.
didn't
Uh,
know.
no, it's all good. No, this has all been amazing info. And there's a reason it's called Excess Succeed. So please don't worry about that. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
um, I guess just the general idea is if you can trade up with your armor boosts and your fairly robust power numbers on your attacks. If you can if you exceed, you can start playing at your opponent's bad ranges, depending on what options are left. And also just like, and then also just yeah, just like eke out ways to like get value out of the free force, whether that be like just a more efficient move action, or just like changing cards. Like you don't have to if you yeah. Oftentimes, like if you don't have to be afraid about like changing away your ultras or just cards that you don't need in your current situation for
Right.
cards that are useful. Um, I guess it's just the general. There's just some general things to consider, I guess, when you're playing Treasure Knight.
Sure. That all makes sense to me. That sounds good. All right. Well then, Chica, once again, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. I'm looking forward to talking to you again about a couple more characters. But for now, I think we can call it. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everybody
Thanks
watching,
for having me on.
yeah, of course. No, you're the one doing me the favor. To everybody watching, thank you for your time and your attention, and I hope you have a good day. I'll see y'all later. Bye.